Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the French presidential election. Now, Emmanuel Macron won France's presidential election, fending off a historic challenge from far-right candidate Marine Le Pen during Sunday's runoff vote. With this victory, Macron has become the first French leader in 20 years to win a second term in office. His rival, Marine Le Pen, nevertheless secured far-right's highest vote share yet. In his victory speech, Macron vowed to address all of France's current problems. Le Pen, on the other hand, termed significant vote share for a party as a victory and said that they are preparing for the forthcoming legislative elections as well. Now, the contest this time was a rematch of the 2017 French presidential runoff, though voter turnout was just under 72%, which is the lowest in a presidential runoff since 1969. So what are the key challenges for Macron in his second term as president of France? We will discuss and analyze this and various other related aspects in today's episode of Perspective. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have with us Mr. Jacques Rupnik, who's joining us, Director of Research Science Pro, Paris, France. We also have with us Dr. Mohan Kumar, former ambassador of India to France, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary is also joining us, Foreign Affairs Editor of Hindustan Times. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Sansad Television. I'll begin with you, Mr. Rupnik. Let's start by taking an overview of what went down, how it went down, and the significance of this presidential election result is concerned, not only for France, but for Europe and the whole world as well.
Well, it's first of all personal triumph for the president to be re-elected. This is very unusual in France for a president to get re-elected. He defeated his opponent very clearly, so there's not even there is no discussion about who won, which doesn't mean that there are no problems for him ahead. It's important not just for France, it's important for Europe, because there was great concern throughout Europe that in case Marine Le Pen won, it would not be the end of the European Union overnight, but it would certainly mean a disruption, a break in the Franco-German partnership, and more generally, of the French engagement into strengthening European integration. So it would be a move towards a kind of loose association of nation states, which would suit a number of the prime ministers, let's say, in Poland or in Hungary, perhaps, but certainly would put an end to the great ambitions that President Macron had for the European project. So, okay. At least in those two respects, this is, let's say, a reassuring vote for those in France who are concerned about the far right coming to power, and of course for all our European partners.
Okay. We'll come to that part vis-a-vis the opponent to Emmanuel Macron and the far right as well a little bit later. But Ambassador Kumar, Macron and his role in European Union, of course, as France's president, seems to have taken a larger perspective after Angela Merkel's departure from the post of Chancellor in Germany. If you look at it from that perspective and also from France's perspective, vis-a-vis India's interest also, how do you see Emmanuel Macron winning a second consecutive term?
I think this is huge, whichever way you look at it. I'd like to describe it as follows. There is palpable relief in the West, in particular Europe. There is resignation perhaps in China and Russia, and there is particular delight in India. This is the way I would like to describe the reaction to Macron. There is no secret. Prime Minister Modi has invested heavily in the personal relationship. I was within 2 months of my retirement in Paris as ambassador. I was literally packing my bags when Prime Minister Modi's office said he would like to be the first overseas leader to come to Paris and congratulate Macron. That's what he did. And I'm absolutely delighted that he's doing it again. In the next 1 week or so, Prime Minister Modi, I hear from reports, will be in Paris to congratulate Macron again. That should give you an idea about the relationship between the two men. As far as Europe is concerned, I think I'd like to agree with my European colleague who spoke before me. There is a Franco-German locomotive which is extremely important for Europe. So in this particular case, Macron becomes the senior statesman because of the retirement, as you say, of Angela Merkel. So you have the Franco-German motor, which is back at work. Europe is back at work. India, apart from being extremely happy with Macron's re-election, wants Europe to be an independent pole. And Europe can be an independent pole only if France and Germany act together. Okay. From that perspective, I think Le Pen's victory would have signaled a very fractured Europe. She didn't want to get out of Europe, although that's what she said 5 years ago. She moderated her position, but everybody knew that there would have been serious tensions between Brussels and Paris, and that is not to anybody's help if you are seeking a multipolar world. Okay. So from all perspectives, I think for India, for Europe, the West in general, NATO in particular, they will be delighted to note this victory by Macron. And as my European colleague said, the victory is not in doubt. Now, that is not to say that he doesn't face domestic challenges, but perhaps we will turn to that when you ask me that question later.
Indeed. We'll come to that as well, Mr. Kumar, but let me first bring in Pramit here. Pramit, do you agree with this view, as Mr. Kumar is saying, and Mr. Rupnik was also referring to it, that a lot of stakeholders seem to be very content with the election results? That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is, well, the victory has been secured, but the real challenge begins for President Macron in the second term?
Yes, I think if you look at the social divide that's always been there, but I think is now even more greatly evident from the election. If I'm correct, the figures are about 70% of what we would call college-educated French voted for Macron, and largely in the urban, especially in urban areas. But working class Frenchmen, I think about 60 to 65%, put their vote behind Le Pen. And interestingly enough, if you look at, she herself only squeaked by Mélenchon, who was the extreme left candidate, but a bulk of his vote seems to have switched to her, indicating there's a very strong anti-establishment, anti-status quo sentiment among a very large portion of the French population. There was also a fairly large number, I think close to 9% of French actually went to the ballot box and refused to vote for anybody. They basically said, we're not going to, we marked the equivalent of what we would in India call nota, indicating again a fair degree of unhappiness with what the political situation.
Okay.
So Macron was effectively elected with about 38 to 39% of the electorate. This is not unusual in Anglo-Saxon nations. It is a little more unusual in France, where there tends to be a far greater degree of political involvement in the voting process.
Okay.
The problem is that for Macron, as was the case now in the United States, where Biden also faced overcame with difficulty a similar working class revolt in the United States. But in Britain, obviously, the establishment actually did succumb to a similar revolt, which led eventually to Brexit. So for a lot of the major Western countries, this is an enormous issue. How do you bridge this social divide, which is undermining, if you wish, the legitimacy of the existing political structure? This then is, of course, reflected in the broader foreign policies of these countries. So you have a Le Pen who could talk about leaving NATO, talking about the possibility of a Frexit, of France leaving, or as Ambassador Kumar saying, reducing the unity of the European Union. In the midst of a war, a Ukraine war, where you would have expected there would have been a strong sort of say, rallying around the flag on this issue,
Okay.
especially about NATO. So India, I think, will be broadly pleased with this because we would like to see Europe become a much more geopolitically active partner, including not just in Europe, but in the Indo-Pacific as well. France is our #1 Indo-Pacific partner from Europe. And it would be questionable if that would have continued if Le Pen had come to power.
Indeed, that is a very, very significant and important aspect there. But vis-a-vis the domestic challenges and the domestic politics there, Mr. Rupnik, I'd like to bring you back in here. If we take a deeper look into those numbers, and as Pramit was also referring to, it is indeed an emphatic victory for Emmanuel Macron, but this is also the highest votes being polled by far right there. So a push in the vote percentage there, seemingly Philip, as Le Pen was saying there, that clearly they're preparing for legislative elections, upcoming elections in June. And the question is, how big do you think domestically the challenges will be for President Macron in his second term, and the key challenges out of them, which he needs to tackle?
Well, the challenge will be very big because as he said himself in his speech immediately after his victory, he doesn't want to continue. He wants a new beginning. He wants a new start. Why is he saying this? Because he has his movement in the center, but he hasn't built a proper political party. To win legislative elections, you need a party machine. You need people who campaign for you, etc. He hasn't got that. And he also understands that it's not just between, a liberal center and right-wing nationalist populist. There is a third bloc, and that's on the left. There is also a left populist challenge led by Mr. Mélenchon. He went in the first round, he arrived just 1% behind Marine Le Pen. He could have been the challenger. So Macron understands that for the parliamentary elections, he has to create some kind of coalition of forces on the center right, on the center left, hopefully bring in some of the green, the ecological movement with him, because he said that the environment and ecology will be among the key priorities in his new presidencies. So he understands he has to be broader than he was. The second thing is he will have to, he understands that the French electoral system, which is a majoritarian system, it gives a bonus to the strong parties, but it leaves a large section of the electorate unrepresented. You simply don't get in the second round. So he has promised to reform the political system and introduce proportional representation, maybe not full proportional representation, but simply to make sure that these protest votes that we have seen in the first round will be represented in parliament and therefore work within the institutions rather than working in the street. Because that's, I think, the big lesson he's learned from his presidency, is that he started as a great reformer.
Okay.
His reform ran into opposition from the movement of the Yellow Vests, which was essentially a protest against a tax on petrol, on gas. And he understands that there is a great dissatisfaction, great social divide, and that you have to address that other half that doesn't feel that they are let's say, winning in this system. You know, France is a strange country, which I would describe as a paradise where half of the population think they live in hell. So you have this anger, this latent. It used to be fear, simply people who wanted to be protected, and this fear. Because with fear you can cope, you can try to have protectionist policies to protect you. But then this has turned into an anger and a rejection of institutions, of the elites, of the parties. And that, I think, is the worrying sign that he has, I think, understood, and he will have to address that in his new presidency.
Okay. So not a cakewalk for President Macron in the second term. And Mr. Kumar, you've been there in Paris as India's representative. You understand the intricacies within the French domestic political system as well. From your point of view, if we have to understand, what are the key ways and challenges for President Macron, and the ways to tackle those challenges as well? Because it's not just going to be about France, given the kind of reaction which all of you are pointing out have been coming in from Europe, Western powers, and India as well. Looks like it's a much larger stake.
So it's important to understand that the president in France is all powerful when it comes to foreign policy, security, and defense. So you don't have to worry about the parliamentary elections when it comes to the power of the French president in these areas, which is why I think India can be extremely happy, and so on and so forth. As far as the domestic challenge is concerned, I agree with my European colleague. I want to make a couple of points in addition. One of the unintended consequences of Macron's ascent to power is that he said neither right nor left. So he has managed to blur the right and the left distinctions. In the process, the regular parties of the right and left, socialist and conservative, which have supplied all the presidents of the past, have been completely decimated. They don't even get 5% of the vote. So that is the first. The second issue is Marine Le Pen got over 41% of the electorate, of the vote. That is not an insignificant vote percentage. So there is a shift to the far right that is happening in France, which one has to be aware of. And that is not something that France can rest easy, but it is just a reality. I would add that that is also the general trend worldwide. The other problem that Macron will face is the enormous number of people who abstained and who said, we don't want to choose between cholera and the plague. And that is the voting electorate that Macron will have to convince them that there is a stake in the political system. Because it's not good for a democracy if 30 to 40% of the electorate says, we don't want to vote because we don't find either alternative attractive. So I would like to respond to your point by saying the challenges are all domestic for Macron. He does not have an issue with foreign policy, security policy, defense. He can continue with the European defense project. For example, his position that Europe should be an independent defense player has been vindicated by what is happening in Ukraine. So he can pursue that project, of course, subject to what Germany says, what Italy feels, and what the others say. But I think he will be now the elder statesman. I almost feel ashamed calling him elder because he's just 44 years old. But this is his second term. And he has suddenly become the elder statesman in France, and he can push the European project. I think the challenges are all domestic. He will have to handle the cost of living issue. He will have to handle Islamophobia. He will have to handle the pension reform, the increase in retirement age. And when Macron says, I'm going to govern differently this time, what does he mean? I suspect he may actually take the referendum route.
Indeed.
He may take a referendum in France asking the French people, are you ready to undertake painful economic reforms for a better future? So one will have to wait and see. But his immediate test is he must get a working majority in the parliamentary elections. Otherwise, we are looking at a period of cohabitation with the prime minister of a different political party, and that becomes messy. So I'm hoping and praying that his party gets a working majority in the parliament.
Okay. Pramit, your views there on the domestic challenges and the way you see President Macron in his second term tackling those challenges, as Ambassador Kumar was referring to, looks like, and his speech, the victory speech, also clearly indicated that it's not going to be a continuation of the way he governed in the first term?
Well, as I said, and as I think others have said, the one of the fundamental issues now is that you have to carry out economic reforms. The European political establishment in particular has been unwilling or unable to carry out major reforms in large portions of its economy. If you look at where Europe's GDP growth is going, for example, the Europeans were as a group wealthier than the United States in terms of overall GDP, even I think 15 years ago. Today, America is about 10 to 15% larger, even though its population is at least 1/4 smaller. Europeans have a better living standard, and partly because of their excellent welfare system, but it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to carry out the reforms to sustain the growth needed to pay for those welfare reforms. So it's one of the key challenges that he has to face. Macron, as has been mentioned, attempted some of those reforms, and the political backlash or the social backlash forced him to hold back. This is not just for France. To some degree, it's also true for the United States as well, where Biden is struggling to carry out his own major legislative problems. But the point is that if those reforms are not carried out, growth will slow down over a period of time. It's already probably slipping into a small recession in the next couple of years.
Okay.
So this is going to be the important. He has to go forward. Now, Ambassador Kumar has mentioned a referendum as one of the ways to break this logjam of getting things done. And this is a solution, but it is a dangerous solution. As David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, found out when he tried to resolve the issue of the European Union membership.
Indeed, that is going to be a very, very interesting, option to be chosen by President Macron. But we'll have to wait and see whether he takes that option there. Mr. Kumar, before we bring this discussion to an end, let's also look at the Indian perspective. All of you referred to it, but the main focus of the discussion so far has been domestic challenges and the geopolitical ones as well. But if you look at the bilateral relations between India and France, what are the key, tangible, achievable aspects in this term, in the second term of President Macron, given the fact that the bilateral relationship already is at a very, interesting and a particular specific level there?
I sincerely think the bilateral relationship, for the bilateral relationship, the sky is the limit now. You've got a strong prime minister in India. You've got a French president who has just won a second term. There is absolute bipartisan consensus, a multi-partisan consensus in France that relationship with India is important. Some feel it is a must because it will provide a counterweight for its relationship with China. Other French genuinely think that a country like France must have better relations with the world's largest democracy than an authoritarian nation like China. Whichever way you look at it, this is an excellent climate for Franco-Indian relations to really go from strength to strength. So what can France do for us specifically? In the United Nations Security Council, France has rapidly emerged as a main P5 player, which can sympathize with our positions on Kashmir, on our own aspirations to become a member of the Security Council, on piloting other things on behalf of India. Okay. This had already happened even when I was ambassador. France would take the lead, for example, in India becoming a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. So these are things that have already been happening. I expect that cooperation in multilateral fora to strengthen. That's the first. Okay. The second thing is we will have to really come to help for France in terms of pushing the FTA with Europe. France plays an extremely important role in EU, and we should try and seal the free trade agreement, the investment agreement, and the the geographical indications agreement with EU. We will need France's help in those. Thirdly, in terms of bilateral issues, there is a nuclear park that is coming up in Jaitapur, Maharashtra, which is the biggest nuclear park in the world. 5 nuclear plants. I think that needs to be really looked at closely and progress made. In climate change, we need green funding, we need green technology from France. France can help us with a hydrogen coalition that Prime Minister Modi is so fond of speaking. And let me remind viewers, France is the only European power that has physical real estate in the Indian Ocean, in the form of Reunion Islands and Mayotte. So we need the help of France in keeping the Indian Ocean safe and keeping the sea lanes of communication safe. It is our most important partner in the Indo-Pacific from Europe. And then on top of it, you have issues like connectivity, you have issues like space, and then of course, the most important of them all, defense. In the light of what is happening in Ukraine and in our relationship with Russia, can France become the major defense player or defense partner for India? That is really the key question.
Okay, indeed, and those are going to be really important aspects vis-a-vis India-France relationship. Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar, Mr. Rupnik, and Pramit there as well for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers, as our experts were pointing out the analysis of the French presidential election, wherein President Macron has won a significant consecutive second term, although the far right has secured its highest vote share yet. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.